Hello everyone. We finally managed. I always have a couple of glitches in the beginning, but I'm pretty sure that we're good to go now. Hi, my name is Edoardo Binda Zane. I'm a leadership coach and communication trainer based in Berlin, working around the world, and quite obviously the host of this webinar, Emotional Intelligence for Leaders. Now, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time and making the effort of being here. I have a lot of registrations for this webinar. I think I have people from the States, South Africa, Italy, Ireland, and Canada, and possibly India. I'm pretty sure we're not going to be all together here at this very moment because of, well, jet lags and time differences, but I'm pretty sure people will be catching up. So if you're catching up now, thank you. If you're catching up later, thank you for making the time in any case. Right, we have a lot to cover and time is precious. So I want to give you a brief introduction about who I am, what I'm doing this, but without taking too much time. So as I said, I'm a leadership trainer, communication coach, but I was not always in this sector. I actually started as a consultant. I did the usual business school consulting thing, and I was lucky enough to, straight at the beginning of my career, be able to access consulting at a very high level. I was working side by side with the European Commission, and that allowed me to see a lot of the things that happen in the background. And that planted the seed of what I'm doing now. Here is what I mean. That experience, those 7 years, allowed me to see on one hand the good sides of it, working with people with amazing intelligence, skyrocketing IQs, and knowing that you could learn from them every second, an intense knowledge of structures, of tools, of methods, incredible levels of hard skills. However, what you also noticed at the same point was the fact that there was an utter lack of other areas of work. So lack of communication skills, of software skills, of negotiation skills perhaps, presentation even. So as someone that was already interested in this world, I noticed that just by working, developing some little areas, some very specific ones, I could be performing better than people with so much better experience than me when it came to coordinating a project, working together with others, inspiring others, driving others to do their work. And after that experience, after those 7 years, I went through a few transitions and iterations, if you want, and I arrived where we are now, to emotional intelligence applied to leadership. Now, let's be, how can I put it, honest about it. Emotional intelligence is nothing new, right? It's something that we've heard before, that's been around for like 3 decades perhaps. And we've always said, yes, it's important. Yes, it's fundamental. But if we're honest with ourselves, in the world of work, traditionally in the grand scheme of things, it's always been in the background. It's always been in second place versus performance, numbers, results, because in the end, nobody judges you on how emotionally intelligent you are. They judge you on results. So, of course, details and different shades of gray in this, but hope you get my point. COVID changed everything. And if there is one good aspect we can take from it, is the fact that it allowed us to touch by hand how much not in second place emotional intelligence needs to be. How important it is for leaders to provide psychological safety, to provide transparency, communication, empathy, and how connected all of that is to performance and numbers in the end. Now, what we're going to be talking about hits on a few areas, right? And a few of those areas, actually a major point of them, I'll give you all the references if you want, hit on something that is fundamental, I think, for us now and for leadership in general. And it's a direct consequence of being emotionally intelligent. And it's trust. Now, I'm talking about trust now because I want to show you something. I want to show you something that is measurable and that has been measured. Remember, we are talking about how emotional intelligence was always in second place. We're talking about how we want results, how it's difficult to share results or link financial results to emotional intelligence, and so on. However, there was a study that's taken 10 years to develop that I want to share with you. I saw the numbers that came out of this study and they shocked me. And I'm showing them to you to hopefully have you as shocked as I was when I saw them first. Basically, trust, which is a direct link or direct consequence of emotional intelligence in leadership, when tested in companies, well, they found that high trust companies and low trust companies have major number difference. Here are some results. First of all, if you build trust via emotional intelligence, what you can reasonably expect, high trust company versus low trust company, is double the amount of energy at work. 50% more productivity, meaning that if 2 people were able to do 2 projects, now 2 people are able to follow 3 projects. Of course, then better psychological safety linking to lower sick days, a lower risk of burnout, and so on. And there is a lot more to this, but I want to leave it at that for now. This is a study by Paul J. Zach, by the way. And now take a look at those numbers and tell me that those numbers do not have any financial relevance for results, for performance. Well, of course they do. And developing emotional intelligence to develop trust in your leadership style and building trust in your company delivers those numbers. It's a process, of course. It takes time. But if you want to show something to a decision maker about whether you want to invest in trust or whether you should, these numbers can make the difference. And by the way, I would like this to be not just me speaking to you, but also if you have any questions, anything that isn't clear, anything you want to dig deeper on, we have some time and there is a comment section below the video on YouTube. So feel free to hit me up with a comment and I'll keep on answering them as I see them coming up or at some point when I have some time to do a grouping. All right, sounds good? Okay, right, so we're at the point where we're thinking emotional intelligence is important, right? And we need to develop, right? And it's been out for 30 years, right? So there must be a lot of content about it. Yes, there is. But as soon as you start looking into this content, you figure out that there is a major problem with this. The fact that it's divided in 2 main areas. On the one hand, you have, let's say, the pop culture aspect of it. So little bite-sized tips that you find on podcasts or blogs about how to be empathetic, how to be mindful, how to give feedback. And all of those areas are insanely important. Don't get me wrong, it's not that I don't respect them. But they form part of a bigger process of emotional intelligence that requires a more in-depth approach, not just little bite-sized tips. So if you want to dig deeper into that and you want to find that approach, well, there is another problem with this. The fact that usually what you find or the type of sources you find in there are extremely research-based, extremely academic, extremely scientific. And on the one hand, I love that because I think everything you're going to hear, by the way, is based in science. I like working with that. But when it comes to applying those contents, when it comes to taking them and bringing them into your practice, well, that's challenging. So I don't know if any of you have read the original, Emotional Intelligence by Goleman. Full respect for that book. Love it. Groundbreaking, revolutionary. But if I need to be honest with myself, I find that book unreadable. I find it so extremely contentful, but also theoretical, research-based, or written for a more research and academic public. I read it as a leader, and I found myself extremely interested and drawn into that. But after the end of the book, I found myself thinking, right, what do I do now in order to take all of this and apply it? What is the roadmap? So those were the seeds that started me off, and this is why I developed this course. This course on emotional intelligence, I'm talking about the full version, is something that I developed specifically with the idea to bring emotional intelligence into leadership at a general level, but give whoever follows it a practical approach, something that they can take and work with. Everything that I talk about and everything that I'm going to share with you today, I'm going to give you quite a lot of content already that you can start applying. Everything is science-based. Why? Because if I don't root it in science, if I don't reference every single piece of knowledge that I'm going to share with you, well, that only means that it's a story that makes sense in my head, but I cannot have any guarantee for you that it's going to work. Rooting it in science and referencing every single point is the only way I have to make sure that what I'm giving you will work. But also, I want this to be practical. So for every single point, I have developed specific tools, templates, and roadmaps, if you want, that you can take, apply, do exercises, and witness your progress. So as I said, I'm going to be sharing already quite a lot of content with you today during this free version of the course. If you're interested in not following up the full version, you can take this and apply it. If you're interested in upgrading to the full version, I'm also going to give you a 15% discount on the course's full price at the end of the webinar. So you might want to stick around for that. Right. This was it for the intro. And again, any questions, any comments, feel free to shoot. But I want to get started a bit on the content and looking directly at maybe the question that we haven't asked yet, which is, what is emotional intelligence? We talk about it a lot. We mention it a lot, but what is it? A lot of times I find that we confuse it with empathy, with being able to interact at an emotional level, which is true. Well, empathy is part of it, but it's a lot more. And let's say the clearest way to describe it that I've found is your ability to move your role into your emotional life from a passive one to an active one. Let me repeat it. Emotional intelligence is your ability to take an active role into your emotional life versus a passive one. What I mean with this is the fact that most of the time we let our emotional life happen to us. If we're sad, and we take a negative outlook on the world. If we're happy, we're positive and we're smiling and we take a positive outlook on the world. So most of the time this is not a problem. It's how we work. However, there is a better way of working with it. Especially when it comes to leadership and especially when it comes to experiencing something negative. We all have had, let's say, darker moments in our life, professionally or personally. And the example that I like to make is something that is connected to my own personal history, it's a personal story, but it was the first big breakup that I had in a relationship. I remember feeling extremely disappointed, always negative, always sad about this, but I also remember how much of a toll it took on me. That negativity, that nagging feeling of this shadow that I had in my brain was conditioning every aspect of my life. And I was not emotionally intelligent enough, which means I didn't have the tools to snap away from it and redirect my energy where I needed it more, where I wanted to, Whatever I did, I kept on being dragged back into that. Now, if you don't even need to take an example as drastic as this one, of course, but when it comes to you being a leader, you see that this is not an approach you can allow yourself to take, right? If you enter the office and you are in an extremely negative place and you're being conditioned by a negative emotion and your team witnesses it, well, it's not a leadership trait you want to have. They will want to steer away from you. You will not communicate well with them. You will not drive them the way they need to, and you'll have a number of cascading consequences. Make sense? So what emotional intelligence does is give you the choice, give you the tools to deal with, let's say, a negative emotional state, and the choice of whether you want to stay in that place and process it if you want, or whether you want to redirect your focus and energy elsewhere. And doing this allows you also to liberate resources that you can invest elsewhere. Basically, take my example, always thinking about that negative event that conditioned my life, always being tunnel visioned on that, always trying to push more but never actually managing. If I had the tools to steer away from it, that means that all of a sudden I would have had more headspace to focus more on what I needed to do, be more efficient, learn more, understand difficult concepts more quickly, relate better to others, key aspect for leadership. And when it comes to your team, seeing you always in a positive place, in a constructive place, always having time to develop a one-to-one interaction with each team member builds trust. Remember all those amazing numbers we've seen before. It builds resilience. It drives performance. Why? Because trust is the number one driver of performance in a team. So these are the practical applications of emotional intelligence, and these are the things I'm mostly interested in. So we discussed about it. So, okay, I forgot the slide. We discussed what it is. We discussed what it does. Now let's talk about how to develop it, because let's face it, we're all here for that reason, right? Now, developing emotional intelligence is not something you can do by relying on little snippets here and there, a blog, some hacks, some tips. It's a process. Emotional intelligence is a skill, and just like learning the piano is a skill, you need to start with the basics and then progress and then get to driving others, interact others. And there are steps to this. And there are basically 4 main areas that I want to touch upon in the rest of this webinar. The first one is self-awareness. Second one, being able to influence your own emotions. Third one, being able to read others and read their emotional state. And fourth, being able to interact with others at an emotional level. Briefly, we'll go deeper in each one in a second, and I'll give you a couple of tools. Self-awareness means understanding what you're feeling exactly and why, and understanding where that emotion comes from. Basically observing more and not just letting emotions happen. Influencing your own emotional state means taking that detailed emotion that you have identified and knowing what to do with that specific feeling, knowing how to steer it, and knowing the process to steer away from a negative emotion. Once you're done with that, you can start looking at others. So reading their emotional state, understanding what they need, understanding how they want to interact. And then once you have a good grasp on how others portray their emotions, you can start looking at how to interact with them, how to influence their emotional state in a positive and ethical way, of course, how to drive them away from a negative, stress-filled place and towards a more positive one. So, as I said, this is all a process, right? And processes have steps. And the best way to start developing something in a process is knowing where your starting point is. So this is the first freebie I want to give you, and it's a self-assessment. It's a self-assessment that I have developed myself. It's a self-assessment that, like everything else that I'm sharing with you, is rooted in science, and it's free. You can find it directly on my website, and I encourage you to take a look at that. So click on the link. You can do it now if you want, but it takes a few minutes, or save it for when the webinar is over. Basically, this is a set of 40 questions. All the references are at the bottom of the page, but if the way to take it is looking at every single statement of the 40 of them and pointing out how much you agree or disagree with that statement. What the test will do then is give you an overall assessment of how emotionally intelligent you are, and specifically it will give you a breakdown of how well you, I don't like the word perform, but how well you perform in each one of the 4 areas. Now, a few things. There is no right or wrong, okay? There is no judgment, and there is simply no right or wrong answer. This test is solely meant to give you an idea of where or how emotionally intelligent you may already be, and what area you might need to work on more or less. And once you know that, it's an extra piece of information that you can use to inform your learning style, that you can use to start developing specific skills and knowing what tools you may find more or less useful. Okay? So again, I'm going to keep on working with, keep on going through my content and my webinar and start giving a few tools in those 4 areas. Any questions, anything you want to ask, feel free to shoot. Don't be shy. We still have time. I'm happy to answer questions at the end. All right. Let's start with the first area, self-awareness. Self-awareness is where I find most people to be, let's say, dumbfounded, because when I say the first aspect of emotional intelligence is knowing what you're feeling, people are like, oh, hold on a second. I know what I'm feeling. I know if I'm feeling positive, negative, happy, or sad, and I get it. I get that it might be a weird question to be asked, but think about it this way. In your life, how often do you go deeper in detail? How often do you start breaking it down? If you're feeling sad, do you start thinking about what the shade of sad is, for example? Are you feeling remorseful? Are you feeling rageful? Are you feeling disappointed? Are you feeling ashamed? Those are all negative emotions that can link toward that area. Or when you're happy, are you joyful? Are you ecstatic? Are you contented? It's interesting to see, to start identifying a bit more what your emotional state is, because it will tell you, it will inform you more about what is driving you. Let me give you a more practical example. I like to bring the example of 2 major emotions. One is guilt and one is shame. Guilt and shame feel very similar, okay? But they mean very different things. Feeling guilty means that you do not like something that you have done. And feeling shame means that you do not like who you are. And it's a similar feeling, but it's a major, major difference once you identify what is happening. So this is why I like to start with this, with self-awareness, and encourage people to look deeper into what they're feeling, go into the level of detail that, or go in detail as much as they can, and then figuring out what drives that emotion. Because if you can tell that you're feeling guilty specifically about a specific event, that's already a long train of thought of cause and effect, and that can help you inform your behavior about what to do and how to go on. For this, I like to offer Plotchik's Wheel of Emotion as an interesting tool. It's an interesting map you can take a look at and use to map, let's say, what your emotion is immediately. And in terms of why you want to do this, why you want to start with this, even though it sounds corny or forced, think about this as an engine, right? I mean, I love cars. I love watching the Grand Tour on Amazon or Top Gear beforehand. And, it's like very stereotypical thing if you want. But I love watching them. But if you ask me to pop open the trunk of a car, I will be lost. I have no idea how to distinguish a carburetor from a piston. It just doesn't work. So if I need to fix an engine, first of all, I need to recognize the parts. And by the same token, if I need to fix or condition or influence my emotional state, I need to know what I'm dealing with. I need to know what specific emotion I am touching at that moment. Make sense? So this is why I encourage you to start working with this. Moving on, second aspect is influencing your own emotions. Now, this has to do with what we described before, right? With the fact that sometimes your negativity takes over so much that it becomes difficult to judge well, it becomes difficult to focus right, it becomes difficult to invest your energy where you want it to be. Even though you know you should do that, you don't have the tools to do it. And here, the first step is, of course, recognizing what's happening, and that's where step one comes in handy. Second step, though, is knowing what to do. And here, there are a couple of tools that I want to give you. Of course, the process is a lot longer, more complex than this, but I'm going to give you just a couple of tools that you can quickly implement. And the first one has to do with happiness. Of course, who doesn't like being happy? Granted. But one misconception that we often have about happiness is that it depends on, let's say, who we are as a person in general and on our conditions, like our environmental conditions. So we have very little control. That is wrong. And I'm quite surprised that this isn't common knowledge, to be honest, because studies show that you have right now, at this very moment, full control on 40% of how happy you feel. And without giving you all the theory behind and anything, I encourage you to test this specific exercise. If you want to be happier, one way to do it is to take a piece of paper and a pen and write down something you are thankful for. I encourage you to do it right now where you're listening to me. It can be anything from thank you sun for shining to thank you mom for giving me an education, thank you cat for waking me up this morning, you name it. It doesn't matter as long as you have pen and paper and you don't just think about it. Thinking and writing are different processes. But as long as you have that and write something down, that is able to condition how happy you feel. And it's a very short and simple exercise, but it can help you influence the way you feel whenever you need to. Of course, if you want the full process, we don't have time to go into it right now. It's in the course. You need to consider 2 steps to get out of a negative place, but happiness is a major aspect of one of the steps. So whenever you're feeling down or whenever you feel like you need a kick or a boost, take a piece of paper, write down something you are thankful for. That's it. You don't need to reread it. You don't need to log it. You don't need to do anything else. That simple act is able to boost your levels and redirect part of your energy to where you want it to be. Or at the very least, give you more control. Any questions? Feel free to ask, of course. This is, I'm here available. I'm really live. I'm not just pre-recording something. Make sense where we are so far? So we look at 4 areas of emotional intelligence that are 4 steps to be taken in order. The first one is self-awareness, meaning understanding exactly what you're feeling, understanding what drives the way you're feeling, and understanding how a specific trigger triggers an emotion and how that emotion influences your behavior. the more observant and proactive you are on this, the better your grasp on it will be. Grasp on your emotional life will be. Second point, how to influence your own emotions. And again, remember when I said, when I mentioned my case about spending 2 years trying to move on from a bad breakup that I had. This is exactly what I mean. It means having the tools and the capabilities to steer away from something that is negatively affecting you, sucking off your energy, and basically clouding your focus and your judgment. In order to get out and snap out of a negative place, you need a process in 2 steps. Actually, the first one is snapping out of it, and the second one is not being pulled back in. And you have different tools and exercises to do that. And one of my favorite ones that I shared with you is hacking your own happiness. You have full control on 40% of how happy you feel, which means that if you know how to boost it, you can, 40% is not a minor percentage, it's almost half. So if you manage to boost that 40%, you can severely influence how happy you feel. And the way to do it is a very simple exercise, which is pen and paper, write down something you're thankful for. Do it now, do it for a week, and I guarantee you will start seeing results. Okay? And of course, there is a lot more. There is other ways to condition happiness. There is other ways of redirecting your energy in order to not fall back in. And those are all part of the full course. Moving on. Third area of emotional intelligence I want to discuss, which is reading others, right? Of course, the end game is interacting with others, knowing how to steer them, knowing how to build trust, knowing how to interact with them at a subtle level, expanding the way you communicate with them. But by the same token, unless you're recognizing what the other person is feeling, in what emotional state the other person is at any point in your team, well, you will have very little chances of offering that person an appropriate way of communication. You won't be able to appropriately connect with them or connect with them in the most possible precise way. So think about it in the previous parallel, just like the previous parallel I did. In order to influence your own emotions, you need to know what you're dealing with by yourself. If you want to influence someone else, positively and ethically, always, of course, you need to know and recognize what they're feeling and what they're dealing with. Same thing. Now, here's the good news. The fact that being able or having gone through step 1, which is recognizing your own emotions, will already enable you to work better with others, understand more what they're dealing with, understanding more their emotional state. Just by focusing on yourself, your awareness of it will be higher, and you'll be able to have a more subtle and direct and detailed understanding of what anyone else is feeling at that moment. Of course, if you want to take it to the next level, and I suggest you do, you want to look into reading body language. You want to look into recognizing specific triggers like self-contacts or looking at eye directions or posture. And time is of the essence, so I cannot give you a full-on course on on body language right now. But in the course, I do give you a primer of the signs that in my experience are the most interesting and relevant ones. And for now, I want to give you the basic infrastructure of it. So something that you can use already right now as a reference to try to understand more about what someone else is feeling. And I like to work with body language by dividing it in 4 major areas: shape, intonation, rhythm, and coherence. Here is what I mean. Briefly, shape. It means you look at someone, look at that person's body shape. You can distinguish open versus closed. You can see where the person is leaning. You can distinguish certain micro movements of the face and know their meaning, and basically understand a lot more about what the person is feeling or how the person is relating or wants to relate towards you versus others, for example. It's a very rich source of information, and I'm spending a lot of time going into detail into facial expressions and whole body movements in the course. But think even just looking at a general shape and being aware of it, without being creepy, of course, will allow you to inform yourself quite a lot about what that person is feeling. Second, intonation. Second area of body language. Intonation is the tone of voice. Is it high-pitched? Is it low-pitched? Is it stable? Is it unstable? Where can you feel the breathing? Is it deeper or is it not? And that can tell you about whether there is a specific tension in that person, whether that person is more nervous or less nervous, whether the person is trying to convey something else. And it's another additional source of information that I like to work with, especially when it comes to trembling voices. You can tell a lot looking if you pick up on someone's trembling voice and put it in context. Third area of body language I meant rhythm. And with rhythm, I mean two things: the rhythm of the person's breathing and the rhythm of the conversation. Is it regular and paced? Is it regular and strong? Is it quick back and forth? Is it irregular, going from one topic to another and back and forth and interrupting you? And there are a lot of different combinations when you look at the rhythm of someone's breathing and of the conversation that you can distinguish, that you can dig deeper into, and that you can use connected to all the other elements to inform yourself about what that person is or might be going through. And last, possibly my favorite point of all the four, coherence, which simply means being able to see whether all the other three areas convey the same message. Because if they do, it's a clear manifestation of either the person is feeling something specific that you can read, or that the person is a very good actor. But being a very good actor takes years of training, so that may not be always the case. What usually happens, though, is that someone wants to portray an emotion, and it's really difficult to cover all the areas. So sometimes one or two of these other areas don't follow what the person is going to portray or wants to portray. So if you have this idea of looking at the coherence of elements, then what you can expect is to be able to read that person better. And once you have that, then you can move on to the last step, which is influencing others or interacting at an emotional level. And let's face it, this is what you came here for. This is the gold mine. This is where we want to be mostly proficient, because this has the strongest effects on us, on our team, on how we're able to build trust, on drive performance, inspire others. All of that is amazing. And remember the numbers that I showed you before, how much this is linked to actual tangible results. And of course, there is a lot of content here to go through. But I hope that you see by now why you cannot start from this last point. You cannot be at a point where you haven't covered anything else beforehand, you haven't done any of the work, and you expect to marvelously be empathetic, brilliant, driving others, be resilient. Of course, you can get better with specific tools or hacks if you want, but you will gain so much more if you go actually through the process that I shared with you. So what you want to distinguish here actually is specific advanced techniques to build this level of interaction, to do a little bit every day according to a few triggers that will slowly, little by little, organically build this rapport that you want to have with your team, enabling you to interact with them at an emotional level, enabling them to trust you ethically, of course, and positively, and opening up a channel where you have permission to influence their emotional level and interact with them at an emotional level. Why? Because there is one phenomenon that is key in everything that we're dealing with. This phenomenon, I mentioned it before, but not by name. This phenomenon is called emotional contagion. And if you want to take note of this, take note now. Emotional contagion is something that happens every time in any group of people. And if you are a leader, you need to have this down, or at least be aware of what it is. Emotional contagion means that in a group, the general mood always flows towards the most emotionally charged person. Again, in a group, the mood always flows towards the most emotionally charged person. Say you're at a bar with a bunch of friends, having a great time, and you're happy and you're enjoying yourselves, and someone else enters the group in a foul mood. Angry, annoyed, negative, rageful, you name it. That person sits down with you and enters the group. You will feel how that emotion brings everyone down. Or the opposite. If everyone is, I don't know, tired, bored if you want, and you're just chatting, but it's a low energy point, and someone else enters in an ecstatic mood with great news to share, and it's joyful, and that person is happy and brings happiness, you will feel the whole group's mood converge toward that person. Why is this relevant? It's relevant for you because if you are negatively charged, and as a leader you have a lot more stress to deal with, and you suffer the fact that you're not in control of your emotion, you will be extremely negative, stressed, irritable, and you will drag everyone else's mood down with you. If someone else in your team is, and that person does not have the ability to self-regulate and to boost his or her state, then it is up to you to avoid that person brings down everyone else's mood because of emotional contagion. This is why it's important to be able to interact at an emotional level, be able to influence others, and be able to condition positively and ethically, I'm going to underline this word a lot of times, their way of being and their way of feeling. And as I said, you have some tools that will help you in your day-to-day, and you have some tools that will help you in specific situations. In your day-to-day, you can rely on something called high-quality connections. High-quality connections are short, brief, playful interactions that, if you disseminate them every day in your interactions, and if you know what triggers they obey to, go with them in the long run, you will see how your relationship with your team increases and develops. Don't do anything major. Don't do a big event out of the blue. Work gradually and know what you're dealing with. And in the course, I'm giving you 7 specific triggers that are scientifically proven to boost or to be able to generate a high quality connection. Message for now, do something a little bit every day, one-to-one with each person of your team. And secondly, another situation where you want to be aware of what's happening and have the tools to deal with is whenever you're dealing with a conflict, especially if you're directly involved in one, but also if you see it happening on the outside. Whenever there is a heated conflict, there are emotions that come into play. All right, it's a fact. But a lot of times we are triggered or conditioned to address the emotion, address the most visible manifestation of what is happening, of the other person's anger. So if we do that, what we can expect is a buildup of of emotions and of anger and of negativity, which will cascade effects to you, to the other person, to anyone else involved, and anyone else just around this. So what you want to have to do is use everything you learned in the process to dive deeper in it, to understand the deeper motives of the person, and to address those motives instead of the immediate manifestation of the emotion and the anger. Of course, there is a lot to unpack here, but in the course, I'm giving you a quite detailed way of handling this. For now, suffice it to say, the key takeaway for this one is whenever you're in a situation that requires your intervention, in a conflict, and a very emotionally heated conflict, work in terms of observing the other person, figure out what the person is feeling, and go deeper in trying to understand the person's motives. And there are ways of doing it, better and worse, but we don't have time to get into them. Right. I have reserved some time for questions that you may have. In the meantime, I'm going to give you a quick wrap up of pretty much everything we discussed so far. I don't know when you joined the webinar exactly. I know that doing stuff online is not always the easiest and most organized thing to do because we all have busy lives and everything to go on, to attend to, I meant. Right, I'm going to give you, first of all, 3 things. Here they are. Okay, something is wrong. Anyways. All right, okay. What I've just shared with you is, together with the emotional intelligence self-assessment, which that, again, is a free tool that you can use to see where you are already. It's on my website. It takes about 10 minutes. Feel free to share. I'm also leaving you the course's homepage with a code that will give you a 15% discount on the full price. Again, you are free to take whatever you have you heard me talk about during this webinar and start applying it. I will give you a rundown of what we discussed just for your general reference, or you're free to take the deeper course. Of course, the larger version will have specific tools, templates, and structures that you can follow to develop directly. That said, let's look at what we discussed in the beginning, or where we started from. We started looking at emotional intelligence for leaders and emotional intelligence in leadership. Why is it so important? It's important because if we're able to take control of our emotional life, we're able to redirect our energy where we need to, which is, in case of us being leaders, to our team. You're going to be able to redirect it to what stuff you need to do, to attend to your team, to come up with a new strategy or a new idea to move forward with a project, for example, and not being dragged behind by stress that is mounting, by something negative that happened to you outside the office, and so on. And we've seen that there are practical effects of it. It's not just being empathetic or being mindful or giving good feedback. All of that is key to any leader, but it's not the only thing. And we've seen how tangible the outcomes of emotional intelligence in leadership for a team are. Number 1 is the ability to develop a sense of trust and psychological safety. And we've seen in the beginning how much of a tangible effect that is. So, most of the time we think of emotional intelligence as the end game. Like we want to start being empathetic and give good feedback and interact with others and so on. And yes, that's where the largest outcome is. But to get there and to develop all the skills that you need to be able to do that proficiently, you need to go through 4 steps in order. First one that we've seen, self-awareness. Basically, recognize exactly what you're feeling and why. What you're feeling in detail, not just sad or happy, but remorseful or rageful or disappointed. And being able to trace it back to a specific trigger. That already will put your emotional life more in context and make it more tangible for you. Second one, influencing your own emotional state. Once you know what you're dealing with, you can take it and influence it, modify it, change it. Again, engine metaphor. Once you learn how to recognize the pieces of an engine, you can fix it, you can tune it, you can modify it, you can change it as you want. But trying to fit around with your emotional state without knowing what you're dealing with exactly may not be the best idea. You may do more damage than anything else. And to do that, usually what you want to do is go from a negative place to a more positive one. And I've shared with you the fact that you have 2 steps in this process. First one, snap out of that, snap out of a negative feeling. And second one, be able to not fall back in, because negativity will pull you back in. And a brilliant hack that I've been loving since day one that I've shared with you is a hack on your happiness levels. Take a piece of paper, take a pen, write down something you're thankful for. If you want to do it right now, I guarantee that you will start feeling happier. Do it for a week and you will see how, just in general, your mood will be better. And that's already a major tool to have. Moving on, once you're proficient in this, you can start looking at how other people are feeling, what else you can read from them. Why you want to do this and not interact directly? Because, again, engine metaphor, you need to recognize what someone else is feeling in order to try to influence it, change it, uplift the person, you name it. But if you have no idea what the other person is going through, well, you're just navigating blind. So you want to look at the person's body language. You want to look at what you understand by the person's way of talking. Look at the person's body shape in terms of posture and direction. Look at the person's intonation. Look at the person's rhythm in the conversation and in the breathing. And look at whether all those 4 areas are coherent or not. And if you're able to just look at a person in this sense and take a mental note of what is happening in each area, I guarantee that you'll be able to take in a lot more and use it as background to inform your way of interacting. And then in the end comes what leaders need the most, which is ability to interact, to influence others positively, to create a safe environment, to create a climate of trust, of resilience, and emotional intelligence is a great driver for that. And here you need to distinguish 2 main areas. First of all, your day-to-day approach, which is interacting, doing something a little bit with everyone. One-to-one is best. Just have brief interactions that are open, uplifting, happy, transparent, playful. I go in the course in detail on all the triggers of these connections, but just do something every day with people. And it doesn't need to be anything major. It doesn't need to be an event or team building or whatever people do. I've always hated team building events, and that's also why I started doing training, because I wanted to avoid people doing team building events like I used to do in companies, or I had to. Anyways, don't think about doing anything major. Think about going for the medium term. Think about developing trust and relationships organically. And don't think about this in terms of manipulating others. Don't be negative about it, because people will read right through you. Everything is said, let it come from a genuine place where you want to be a better leader for your team. Otherwise, you're just manipulating, and unless you're phenomenal at it, like a mentalist, people will read right through it, will know what you're doing, and it will backfire badly, and you will have deserved the backfire. Anyways, do something nice. Interact, brief interactions, transparent ones, open, playful, every day. and when you need to intervene in some major situations that require interventions, know what to do. The general reference you want to keep in mind here is called emotional contagion, which is a phenomenon according to which the mood of each group always converges towards the most emotionally charged person. If you manage to be always positive, always constructive, despite the environment that you're in, the group will converge towards you. If you let emotional negativity take over, the group will converge towards you because most likely you have the highest level of stress. If someone else is in a negative place and doesn't have the tools, you need to know what to do to intervene. Otherwise, the whole group will converge towards that negative person. And the effects of emotional contagion happen whether you like it or not. So it's up to you to adopt the best behavior you can to basically use it in your favor. That's what I'm saying. Okay. Any questions? The time is now. We've been here for almost an hour. Brief reminder, you have in the comments of this webinar the link to my emotional intelligence self-assessment, free tool that you can use to check what your level is and use it as a basis to inform what areas you might need to work on the most or the least. Second, if you want to upgrade to the full course, you have the courses homepage on the other comment, and I've also left for you a 15% discount because it's the least I can do for you, giving me your time, giving me your trust, and accepting to listen to me until now. I don't see any questions coming. I will take the fact that there are no questions at this point. I know that you're watching. I know that there are people watching right now. And for you that are watching at this very moment, thank you so much for taking the time and listening to me and giving me your trust. I really appreciate it. And if you're watching this and on a recording and you made it up to this point, I also appreciate the fact that you've been listening to me until now. And if you have any questions, feel free to connect with me. Feel free to look me up on LinkedIn, on Facebook, or on my website directly. And all I can say is thank you again. Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. For the rest, stay safe, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much, and talk soon. Goodbye.